Welcome to Everything Psychology. Today, we are examining a behavioral pattern that quietly destroys the most generous people among us. You were taught that kindness was a virtue. You learned that being patient and completely selfless made you a good person, and you believed that childhood conditioning without question. But rarely are we taught how these traits operate in high-conflict scenarios, where the very qualities that define a good person can be mapped out as mechanical points of entry. The most dangerous predators in this dynamic are not obvious villains or strangers on the street. They are the people closest to you, the individuals you trust the most. Kind people are not targeted out of weakness. They are targeted because empathy and patience are rare psychological traits. Toxic individuals recognize these traits and treat them as levers to be pulled. Understanding the dark psychology of being too nice is the only way to stop your extraordinary human qualities from being weaponized against you. Let's break down exactly how this trap functions. The first layer of this trap relies on a psychological concept known as pathological agreeableness. For chronically kind people, this trait is a childhood survival strategy. To navigate unpredictable environments, the nervous system learned a specific rule. The logic dictates, saying yes guarantees safety, saying no threatens conflict. This conditioning persists into adulthood as an involuntary reflex. You find yourself apologizing and rushing to soothe situations before your conscious brain has even processed what is actually being asked of you. Toxic individuals quickly recognize and exploit this exact reflex. They know with certainty that you will consistently prioritize artificial harmony over uncomfortable honesty. This leads to a second vulnerability, a cognitive bias called the projection of virtue. Because you are a genuinely good person, your brain automatically assumes that everyone else operates using the exact same moral framework and conscience that you possess. Healthy individuals view empathy as a bridge. Toxic individuals view it as a vulnerability to be drained. This projection forces you to rationalize hurtful actions, convincing yourself their behavior is unintentional or a byproduct of hidden struggles, rather than malicious intent. Projecting your own virtue onto someone else is the exact mechanism that weaponizes your loyalty. It keeps you tethered to parasitic relationships long after you should have walked away. Fawning is the lesser-known third trauma response, operating alongside the more recognizable fight or flight instincts. Fawning functions as a preemptive defense mechanism. Rather than fighting or fleeing, the nervous system neutralizes potential threats by becoming exactly what the aggressor requires. In adult relationships, this deep-seated fear of conflict and disapproval flawlessly masquerades as simple kindness or a natural desire to be accommodating. Toxic partners do not need a clinical understanding of the fawn response to take advantage of it. They simply observe that they can treat you poorly, and you will absorb that behavior without ever issuing a consequence. When toxic behavior carries zero cost to the perpetrator, your continuous appeasement guarantees that the exploitation will escalate and continue indefinitely. We also have to challenge a destructive cultural myth. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that absolute self-sacrifice and limitless availability are the defining markers of genuine love and devotion. When a toxic person relentlessly demands your time, energy, and emotional labor, you misinterpret those demands as proof that you are deeply needed and highly valued. The clinical reality is different. True reciprocal love does not require the complete erasure of one person to make another whole. This dynamic represents systemic extraction, a process where emotional labor is harvested under the guise of commitment. Failing to distinguish between mutual, reciprocal love and parasitic extraction is exactly what allows toxic dynamics to masquerade as profound connection. This brings us to boundary blindness. This is not a personal failure of willpower, but rather an entirely missing psychological framework. For chronically kind people, this blindness takes root in childhood, where any attempt to assert basic personal needs was actively punished or labeled as selfish and difficult. Because that software was never installed, you become an endlessly permeable adult. You unconsciously broadcast to predators that there is no cost of entry to your life. This leads directly into the reasons why kind people remain trapped in toxic loops long after clearly recognizing the warning signs. Your reluctance to leave has nothing to do with ignorance or a lack of intelligence. You stay because of a fiercely deep empathy and an irrational sense of hope. The trap snaps shut when you fall in love with the toxic person's initial performative phase. The cruel trick is conditioning you to believe that offering more kindness and patience is the only way to bring that fake persona back. Staying too long manifests these layered vulnerabilities, trapping the individual in a cycle where giving continues long after the return has vanished. To break this cycle, the solution is not to become cold, suspicious, or to amputate your empathy to prevent future abuse. Doing so would allow them to take the most valuable part of who you are. Instead, you must consciously alter your approach. You transition from a state of blind kindness to the precise application of aimed kindness, guided by rigorous discernment. You can test your relationships by observing one key metric. Distinguish safe relationships from toxic ones by noting whether your generosity is met with gratitude, which reciprocates, or expectation, which only escalates. True recovery begins the moment you recognize that your personal comfort and basic needs are a mandatory baseline for any relationship, not an optional burden you place on others. To stop the reflex of people-pleasing, practice somatic awareness. Notice the physical spike of anxiety in your body right before you automatically say yes, and actively insert a deliberate pause. You also have to reframe the concept of saying no. It is not an act of cruelty. It is a neutral, essential tool for gathering data on exactly how others react when you enforce your limits. You can implement this using a clear boundary checklist. Step 1 is the 24-hour rule. Mandate a full day of reflection for all new requests. Step 2 is the resentment audit. Catalog your existing obligations to see where you feel quietly drained. Step 3 is the baseline test. Issue a small limit and observe the reaction. Step 4 is energy allocation. Match your effort to proven reciprocation rather than an individual's potential. If this video named something you've been living through, share it with the kindest person you know. Subscribe to Everything Psychology and drop a comment below. Have you ever been taken advantage of for being too nice? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Remember, your kindness was never a character flaw. The true flaw belongs entirely to the individuals who mistook that beautiful quality for a weakness to exploit.